Hey, Power Athlete Nation. Welcome to another episode of Power Athlete Radio, where we take questions and we give answers. We typically do this through our hotline, which if you're interested in leaving us a question on the hotline, you can reach out at 929-464-464. 929-ING-ING.
0.
Yeah, just call up, leave us a message. You can drop us a text. I did hear a rumor that they will accept some smoke signals. So if you know how to work one of those, you're going to need a wet blanket and a big fire, and you can send us smoke signals. But we're going to deviate slightly for episode 520 because we have Dr. Matt Zanis here. Hey, Doc. How you doing?
Pretty good, John. Thanks for having me here again.
Okay. And I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Chris McQuilkin, a.k.a. Tex.
Howdy. That's my new tagline.
Oh, howdy.
Why aren't there two howdies?
Howdy, howdy?
Yeah.
Like ahoy, hoy?
Or howdy doody?
Well, then I'd be calling you Duty. I don't think that's very appropriate, John.
Oh, well, I mean, wasn't that one like, oh, howdy doody? Wasn't that a puppet?
No idea.
Yeah, maybe it's before all of our times. Nevertheless, Dr. Zanis reached out to some of his colleagues and pulled a couple questions and brought them to us. And so we're going to ask and answer some of those. So what do you got, Doc?
Well, this is the second one I'm doing now, so I am feeling a little bit like Alex Trebek from Jeopardy. Can I take communication for 100, please?
Oh, I like it.
Yeah. So this question is on communication. So what is the current state of communication, and why is there so much fear around speaking your mind? Big question.
Yeah, that is a big question.
Timely question, too.
Communication how? Using our platform to share our thoughts and feelings? Or
I think there's a lot of
in the office?
I think there's a lot of unconventional communication happening today that we've never seen in the past. I mean, think about podcasts, think about social media. I mean, as we were kind of talking, like, what did this thing look like pre-social media? You know, if you were an NFL player, ESPN and the ticker at the bottom was like, you know, the end all be all. But now you have situations where, you know, players are, providing information, and there's, endless amounts of pages on Instagram and Twitter and that's providing all this different kind of back and forth. So I really think we've seen an unconventional shift in communication just because there's so much more opportunity for people to report and just interact.
Yeah, I think everybody can use their voice nowadays, which I think is great as well, but I don't think everybody is a great communicator either. I mean, I think we take it for granted.
This is a problem I have is everybody has the right to their opinion, but I don't believe that everybody's opinion has the same value. So, I mean, we get into this, and I mean, I can say in like, as it pertains to football, I listen to people constantly that have no fucking idea what they're talking about, and they're open to their opinion. But when it comes down to me having a conversation with them, I'm like, I don't value your opinion because I don't think you know what the fuck you're talking about. And it's like, well, you have to, value my opinion. I'm like, I don't. You can have it, but I don't have to listen to it, and I don't have to give it weight just because it's yours. Especially when also when it comes to strength conditioning or performance training or the stuff we do. Like, I'm sure people have their opinions, and you're more than entitled to your opinion. But just because you have it doesn't mean that I have to necessarily give it any weight if I don't think it's fucking valuable.
Right. I think that comes down to respect. Like, you don't have to agree with their opinion, but can you respectfully disagree? I think that's a lot of the problem right now too. Is people can't be respectful about other people's opinions, and that's what they think leads us into trouble and a lot of this fear that's associated with speaking your mind.
Is the fear of speaking your mind really just kind of a fear of maybe call out culture or cancel culture?
Yeah, I think potentially. I think there's a lot of like, especially like in a professional setting as well, like I'm in. You say something and you feel like that if somebody takes it the wrong way, it could potentially be the end of your business. It could be the end of your professional career. You can get fired.
So give me an example.
So, I mean, this is why, they always say don't talk about politics and religion, right? Mm-hmm. Because everybody has a very specific viewpoint of that.
Ever, or just at like Thanksgiving?
Well, I mean, I was kind of thinking like in your role, like something that could be said in your arena might not be construed as something like let's say an athlete comes in or you're working with somebody and you're like, man, your glutes look great. Right. And like your person could be like, oh, well, like, here's something where they're, been working on putting a big toe in the ground and, they've been suffering from glutenesia. Remember we always talked about that. Like the glutes were somehow asleep.
Because that's a real thing.
Yeah. total real thing. But now all of a sudden you're like, man, it looks like you're, like when you're walking, like your glutes are moving, and like you look a lot more put together than you did, right? Like that would be a compliment that if you made. Now, if Tex is out there and he's like, you really look like you're using your glutes, they look really put together. It might be, and he's at the bar, it might be considered, who knows, a little bit different. So
I do.
I think that's applicable to both of us.
Well, but I mean, that's situation and context.
Yes.
Yeah, situation and context. So I wonder in your situation, in your job, or even in a commercial gym, or let's say you're working with kids or whatnot, things that we would think might be funny, or a joke that maybe we would tell, or maybe something that might have been funny 20 years ago, today might be construed, and next thing you know, you lose a job.
Well, two things there. I think people are a lot more sensitive today than they were 20 years ago.
Why is that?
Oh boy,
Are people searching to be outraged? Like that's what I feel like. I feel like people are going out of their way to be outraged.
I think it's a chemical imbalance. I think you can get a high from it as well. Like you kind of live in that mindset.
Oh,
right?
that's the science of the social media, right? People are liking or retweeting.
Dopamine.
Big dopamine hit. Yeah. I think that's one side of it too. But then the other side of, what was that question again? Sorry, John, say that one more time. I completely forgot my other train of thought there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I ruined.
Blanked.
Ruined the flow state.
Did really ruin the flow state.
You got it back?
Mm-mm.
I just want to say an interesting thing that I recall hearing. The first radio president, the first television president, and then the first social Twitter president. We had FDR's fireside chats over the radio. Mm-hmm. Then JFK was the first president to stand and deliver a message on the television.
Yep.
And then we've witnessed President Trump using social media as his contact to the country.
Well, there it is. It's a delivery. That's what I was searching for. I think it comes down to people's sensitivity to what is being delivered as the message, and then how you actually deliver the message and what kind of impact you're trying to have, right? Because I think that sometimes you bring up your example of saying your glutes are looking real good. I could be a creeper about that, and I think I could change the tone of my voice. And
it's going to require you to have like a jean jacket with no shirt on that you're just picking your belly button. And you're like, hey, your glutes look real good. They look like they're firing real well.
Get down. They're nice and deep black.
Yeah. Hey, that guy keeps paying Justin to wash his car. And he's
Dodgeball's great.
Yeah. That's
that's good.
Yeah. But that's like an interesting piece of like the communication factor. Like, and we see this all too often. Some person who's got like a different positioning says something, and then another person in a different position says the exact same thing, and all of a sudden one is taken as good humor and joke, and then another one is taken as like swords, and then the other one, which blows my mind constantly, is people I think search social media and the internet looking to be outraged by things. Like if I am scrolling through my social media and I see something I disagree with or something I don't like or whatever, I'll read through it and I just go past it. Like I don't stop, and it's always amazing to me where people will see things like I'll just give an example. Like I have that Mark Ripto gave me the Texas secede sticker, so it's a Texas flag that says secede, and when we ran into Rip, he gave us a couple, and I put it on my truck and I posted a picture. And like some guy's like outraged by it, and I get into it with this guy. I'm like, so this picture is upsetting to you? Why? Like the sticker, it's like good humored. Like this Texas seceding, no. Is it kind of a funny piece? 100%. And like I just can't imagine like being so outraged that I would stop and leave a comment and want to engage somebody based off of seeing a bumper sticker.
Yeah, so that brings up, can't people actually engage in satire anymore, or is it dead?
Well, I mean that's a hard part. Like irony and satire is completely lost to the point where, like on the old CrossFit football boards, when people would get lambasted, I used to put on there all the time. I'm like, now just imagine this being said in person and us getting a good chuckle out of it instead of feeling that everything's a personal attack, because there's no inference, there's no satire, like there's no irony, like you can't, they almost need like an emoji that you should put that like lets you know that this is going to be fucking a joke.
Yeah, you should trademark that one, design it and trademark. Then get Epsom salt on it.
Yeah. I wonder what the hey, this is like, you might take this the wrong way, but just know I'm fucking kidding. Like, what is that emoji? And that would be a pretty good one to have.
I mean,
I think it's the upside down smiley face.
Is that what we're gonna claim? Sure.
I'll start
I'll
using
ask
that
what
one.
that means. I'll ask the Google. I'll check back in 5.
I just send a lot of like purple eggplants.
Oh, that's definitely taken the wrong way.
Yeah.
That'll get you fired.
Yeah. If you send I mean, so now is a situation where if you were to send somebody the wrong emoji, you could get fired?
Potentially.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Jesus.
Yeah. But the Instagram algorithms, they search for that kind of stuff,
Oh,
right? So
dude, I nailed it. So,
careful.
Emojipedia
Phrasing.
on Twitter. Let's see. Yellow smiley face turned upside down. Upside down face commonly conveys sarcasm, irony, humor, and silliness.
So an upside down smiley face.
There it is. Nailed it, Ted.
Boom.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'll start putting
It
those
is
before
frequently used in a playful indication of awkwardness, frustration, ambivalence, and bemused resignation. So,
Good old bemused
with every
resignation.
comment that we say on this podcast, assume upside down smiley face.
So why is it? I mean, is it it's a situation where people are more outraged? Is it more content? Is there more information? Are there more things to be outraged about? Or is it the fact that people are just more sensitive today than they probably were maybe 100 years ago? And I really believe it's because we don't have enough hardships in our lives that I believe that people, because things have become so easy, things are so automated. Like, it's not like you're out like tilling the farm, trying to grow foods, kill something, like put meat on the table. You're working all day. I mean, for the most part, it's, I think, from an absence and more importantly, boredom, or just not having enough going on in your life. Like, I remember watching a pretty interesting story where they were talking about this a group that built all these schools in Africa, and these girls had to get up at 3 a.m. because they had to walk 5 miles to get fresh water and come back, and then bring the water back, and then they had to walk like some god awful amount, like miles, to the bus stop. And as they're going to the bus stop, they got to navigate like wild animals, potentially people to kidnap them, and like their day just trying to not only get water and get to school was so packed with like the amount they had to do that and then they had to get home. Like, there's not much to worry about. They have a lot more to worry about, more so than somebody's mean tweet on.
So essentially what you're saying is we have way too much time on our hands.
Yeah, and not enough hardship. So I think what we do is when you don't have hardship or you have too much time on your hands, you go out and you find ways to create hardship.
Well, it's not only hardship, it's a number of things to focus on. Family, maybe they're focused on developing relationships and communication within the family. So not only problems, but also positive things within their social network that allow them to work on communication or teamwork or play. So not only the negative, but also positives to focus on for personal development that keep you away from just finding negative things to bitch and moan about.
Oh, because that's what the algorithms are trying to push your way, or all the negative things to incite a reaction, right?
Yeah, but I mean, we were talking about energy on the last podcast. What I find is that if I allow myself to absorb too much of that negative energy, and there's too much of this like fucking craziness, it just fucks me up. And all of a sudden, it doesn't allow me to be a good father or run a good business or do everything. I think if anything, it just puts people into these like a whirlpool almost, and they just can't get out of it, and they just get stuck in these loops. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's by design or that's just how it works, but you're almost better to like not turn on the news. I only really try to look at like my social media feed or go through any of that stuff maybe once a day, just because it's like it's so overwhelming that you could just get stuck. And I think a lot of times where people were locked down with COVID, where there was not a lot to do other than watch Netflix and hang out, and you were stuck at home, I think it became the norm for people, and people got more plugged in, and this became their access to the world and their entertainment.
I talk about a perfect storm to just land-based people with useless information, right?
Oh, yeah.
Especially if you have an agenda behind it too.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. Well, I think to your point too, it becomes a distraction. And then what we do is we utilize that as more of a way of becoming busy, right? Instead of actually being productive. So everybody,
it's good,
right? So everybody feels like they got no energy left by the end of the day. You can't be a good father, can't be a good husband, can't play your kids. You don't want to work out. Well, think about all the energy that you're wasting just mindlessly scrolling Instagram, and it's draining to you, extremely draining to you.
Yeah, no. The call out culture is a pretty interesting one. Like we were talking about fear, like why people are afraid to express maybe what their true feelings are. The call out culture is kind of interesting in that it's like the idea of nobody is safe, and I think it's kind of valuable in some ways. I mean, we saw with the whole Me Too movement and Harvey Weinstein, where these very powerful individuals had done some awful things to people. And because of the weight that they carried within their circle, they were kind of untouchable. And, like all these stories where you would hear and you'd just be like, who are they talking about? More importantly, like, how come nothing ever happens? And then all of a sudden you get into this call out culture where now all of a sudden they're, calling people out in here. And now all of a sudden you have a guy like Harvey Weinstein behind bars because of that very deal. But what happens is everything that's good ends up getting weaponized into a bad way. Now all of a sudden you have a situation where, it's very easy to start rallying different people in different ways for a call out culture. And I mean, the funny part is I don't ever remember this pre-social media. I don't know how you would have pulled this off social media, but hashtags trend on Twitter, and all of a sudden now like people start kind of globbing on, and then they dogpile, and things can get pretty nasty. And then we've also seen that evolve into cancel culture.
Well, thinking about how this would happen, it'd be like an investigative report, and they'd have to send somebody in undercover and muckrake a little bit. If you remember, I'm trying to
good
remember.
old muckraking.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the book that called out the meat industry in the 30s, and created like the USDA. So there was good things that came of it back then.
Well, I mean, but that was the Woodward and Bernstein. That was the investigative journalism. All the President's Men. That's
a great point.
Yeah, I mean that was the job of the media. I mean, the press and the media was the fourth branch of government. The idea that there was a watchdog there to make sure that everybody's honest. But unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. We have a situation where,
it was Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. That was the book I was thinking of.
Yeah, and now we have a situation where, no longer is the media looking out for our best interests. So,
to me, when I hear fear, I go to the body and the physiological level with the brain,
Ooh.
right, and the emotions and how it responds. Fear innately is always a response to threat, right? So it's a survival strategy. And what happens when we are in fear? We shut down, we close off, we play small, we don't put ourselves out there. It's a protective mechanism. So I think when we talk about something like cancel culture and the fear around, having your character smeared, your job taken away, your business destroyed, you're not going to put yourself out there. You're going to do the same thing that happens with fear of movement. You just stop moving, right? And I think that is a very anti-productive result of what people are doing here with this type of thing.
I mean, is that a form of control and manipulation that that you can manipulate and control people by forcing them to do nothing and act in a way that to avoid something like this?
I visualize this as like pushing somebody into a corner, like a rat pushed into a corner. What's it going to do? It's going to react, right? Because it's got no other options, right? Because you've pushed it so far that the only option that it has is to fight back.
Sure.
Right, and that could be in a positive way or it could be in a not so positive way. And I always go back to another great book, A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And he has one of my favorite lines in there is that between every stimulus and response is space. So it's our job to create as much space as possible to be able to respond to a situation instead of react to that situation. Right. So what I teach people to do from a coaching standpoint, it's through the breath. Like, how can we slow down the breath? How can we slow you down to actually think first and feel into your body versus just emotionally reacting because you're triggered?
Yeah. I mean, the think before you speak, is, like that cliche. I mean, people have always said it, like, you hear something, take a deep breath, think about how you're going to do it. I mean, the age-old one, too. I mean, how many times have I written a letter or an email to somebody, felt better, and then just deleted it?
Oh, you're not supposed to send it?
No.
Shit.
Like, there's a lot of times I wrote letters and emails that I was like, man, you feel better writing it, putting it out. But I don't always know if I think you get into a situation where everything is so reactive. Everybody's reacting to everything, and it's such a fast deal that a lot of times, and I don't know, maybe to a fault, I'm slow to react. I like, as you guys know, I like think things through, and I try to take things very, very cautiously and think through all of these problems, because I've found in the past when we just point and shoot, we end up running into more and more problems.
I like that quote. That book's on our intern reading list. I have it up in the locker. I had Cole read it, but now I got to hand it off to our next guy. With lacrosse practice and trying to empower the future, I pick one word and then bring it into the huddle each practice, and then eventually this spells out words like victory. So it would be an acronym. So vitality, and then the I in victory I chose was impact. So we decide how actions, calls, everything impacts us. We can put our head down and slam the stick, or we can use it if it's a negative thing. And then the positive, like, we can't over-celebrate because it's on to the next play. So I like that, leaving space. I'll go back to the book to then expand on that thought. But that was the I, the impact. Empowering the kids to then they decide how they react to good and bad things. And then, I want to turn it into a force.
But here's the problem, is that the way the kids are reacting, being so volatile, is what they're seeing in their everyday.
True.
Everything is such this visceral, violent reaction. Like, they don't see level heads prevail. Like that's not what's getting notoriety. That's not what's getting pushed.
But I hope 2 hours a week is just enough to at least maybe plant a seed for the future.
Yeah, take a deep breath, think this thing through. Don't be an idiot. Pull your head out of your ass. Yeah.
Pull your head out of your ass. I don't use that maybe.
Well, and this is probably something that, in 2021 doesn't get said to kids enough, but I remember as a young athlete hearing that, I don't know, directed at me, but also my teammates at least a dozen times a day. Pull your fucking head out of your ass. And it was to the point where you're like, man, I don't even know how I would do this. Why does he keep telling me to pull my head out of my ass?
What is he trying to tell me? What does it mean?
And it was like, dude, you have you're just an idiot. And there's a age of kids where you are just little, just a moron. And the pull your head out of your ass. My dad used to say it to us, you need to pull your head out of your ass. And but today now kids would be outraged. I can't believe my coach told me that. And you're like, well, your head is up your ass.
Is he right?
Yeah.
Were they right?
Not literally, figuratively. That's something I get into with my daughter. Right. The other problem too, and we were talking about this communication, is because now it's so easy to document every little thing. The fact that you'll see somebody, talking to somebody and somebody's videoing, and you see all these kind of drop in, there's so much, everything's saved for posterity now, that you got to be very, very calculating with what you're saying, because not everybody's going to understand the context. They're only getting dropped in on the 1 second, the George Floyd deal. All of a sudden the video starts, and you see this horrific deal with the guy's got the knee on the back of the head, and that's all we saw. We didn't see the 2 or 3 hours leading up to it. We just get dropped this one clip, and that was polarizing. Not that the information before then makes it better or worse. It is what it is, but we don't get to see any context. We just got to see the most polarizing, disgusting image of something. And I think that's where we get into this, where, no longer are people looking for information. They're looking for sound bites. They're looking to be outraged. And I think if, we know anything to be true, is when you go looking for something, you usually find it.
Yeah. I think that being dropped into a situation like that is very dangerous, and it leads to a lot of impulsivity, which is that emotional reaction that we were talking about. People don't have that time to create more space to actually respond in a logical, rational way. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that I see with communication surrounding literally everything going on right now, from all the COVID stuff to the critical race theory and every kind of hot button topic, is that you run into people who are either one or two categories. You're either nescient or you're ignorant. So nescient meaning not knowing, you break that word down, not in science, so not knowing information, which is great. That's fine. If you don't know, you don't know. Let me enlighten you maybe a little bit and provide some more information. But the minute you provide information, and maybe even well-documented research, literature information, and they choose to ignore it or not acknowledge it, that's what makes you ignorant. And those type of people are, I think, very, very difficult to have conversations with, right? Because you're choosing, it's a choice, right? You're choosing not to acknowledge anything that I'm giving you and have a discussion about it, right? And that becomes a problem when we bring in a lot of the science talk, because science is supposed to be Socratic in nature, right? It's supposed to be a discussion-based format. Everything that's going on right now is not very discussion-based, because if somebody else has an opposing view, an opposing opinion to you, what happens? You get canceled.
Sure.
Or called out.
Yeah, but
right?
Or blocked.
Or blocked.
But how come
completely.
people can't have discourse? Like why is it that if you and I disagree, that it has to go into this, like, well, I have to win and burn everything to the ground, and that it has to turn like where's like the civil discourse where, like, you know, you and I can disagree on something and still agree on other things. Like, all of a sudden this one point is now fucking daggers.
Right. To me, that comes down to conversation and discussion. Like, I think in a conversation, you're getting to the point where, you know, people have two different opposing views, and there's this supposed expectation that there's going to be a winner, or somebody's going to be right at the end, versus a discussion. There doesn't need to be a winner. Nobody needs to be right. We're just having a conversation that it potentially gets us to make a decision that leads us in a different direction, right? But you have to come into it with the expectations that nobody is going to be that winner, right? Because then if you communicate that ahead of time, nobody can be butthurt by it, right? And then you're coming at it with a more logical, rational thought rather than using emotions and triggers.
You think maybe we're not evolving as thinkers deep enough that we can't? I mean, a big part of being a rhetoric major, and especially when we would get into this argument stuff, like, there was always a piece of, like, you have to be able to put yourself in the position, in the mind of your opponent. And if you're arguing something, you have to be able to understand their argument on a granular level, and, like, that bit of empathy. And I think all too often, because we are so quick to react, that we don't put ourselves in the other person's situation, and we don't think through, hey, this is where they're coming from, you know. And a lot of times, whether it be, you know, you hear something, or regardless what's going on in the world. So I always try to put myself into the mind of the individual, and then when I listen to their argument, or I listen to what they're necessarily putting out, and I find that I have been finding that increasingly difficult, as some of the information that's coming out is almost a bridge too far for me to even fathom, like where this is coming from in this information.
Does it make it difficult because you feel the other side of the argument or the table is not doing that, not empathizing with your opinion and experience?
Well, it's I'll just give you an example. Like, all of a sudden, when you hear, you know, you read Rob Wolf and Diane, the Sacred Cow book, and, you know, understanding, you know, Polyface Farms and Joel Salatin, and, you know, we've had people on from the Savory Institute,
Bobby Gill, yep,
yeah, really diving in on this idea of regenerative farming, and that, like, you know, this is how you're going to fix this planet. You know, John Sapolsky we've had on, you know, understanding, like, these problems, and then you hear, you know, this overly impassioned vegan who's like, you know, meat is death, and, you know, we have to somehow save the planet by not eating meat, and you're like, well, that actually is not the case, because what's going to happen to those animals? Are we just all of a sudden not going to raise them? Like, restorative farming and the agriculture that's being done is what regenerates the planet. Like, I mean, you're basically stripping the land of all of its nutrients by fucking planting beans and, you know, too much, pesticides, and it's just like you read a book like Sacred Cow, and it makes a ton of sense. You start looking at all the research, and you go through it, and you're like, this is how you fix the planet. And then you hear somebody who has this, like, completely polarizing other side of the argument, and you're like, I looked at everything, and I can't even fathom where you're standing, you know.
Well, I think it comes down to our biases, though, too, with that. Like, we all have our emotional biases. We all have a bias towards something that we're going to gravitate towards. Like, you know, with the Sacred Cow stuff, like, you're reading that book because I think you already intuitively agree with it.
Yeah.
Right? So that makes it easy. It still doesn't.
Well, it doesn't make it any less true.
Right. It doesn't make it any less true either.
I mean, I've listened to people, clean energy, right? We all need to drive electric cars. I'm like, okay, now just go do a Google search and take a look at what happens when they strip mine for lithium and all the components for a battery and the destruction that happens. Like, like the production of the batteries and what it takes to build electric cars is far more damaging than what's happening with fossil fuels. I mean, the cars today are so much cleaner, so much more well built. I mean, it's like the carbon footprint, and so when you hear these things spun in such a way, and you're like, that's not the way. I mean, if we look at this from the outside veneer peering in, this looks like it makes sense. But when you dig into this and you unpack it, you realize that this is much more harmful to the environment than anything else could happen.
Right. I think that's the moment where you can interject some of that empathy, right, to have a discussion, because you're understanding their point of view despite your own perspective on that, right? And we were just looking at your deer head up there. Perspective changes everything, right?
Yeah.
You didn't realize that it was the one side of the rack was 4 inches shorter until you put it above your head.
Yeah, no,
right?
Until I hung it on the wall next to the others, I was like, holy hell, look how off that is, and something I had not seen before on any other mount.
And so I think that's where we start to extinguish some of these highly emotional debates, is just by offering a different perspective from which to view the topic. Right? It changes the whole entire orientation, because I think this is what I like to do anyway. Anytime I get into a conversation, I try to enter it with the mindset of not being right. Right? So if you go into that, it kind of takes away the ego component of it. And then I think you're more open and receptive to the other information. That doesn't mean you necessarily have to agree with it. You could still extinguish a lot of these volatile debates by just asking better questions, right? And that's usually what happens. Like if you read books on debate and argument, I know you had the rhetoric major, you just keep asking questions until the other person implodes himself.
Sure.
Right.
Well, I mean, eventually people get frustrated
And become more emotional. Yeah. That's how you win those arguments.
Well, and the first person that goes to an emotional state in an argument usually loses. So I mean, there's different things, like you look at ethos, pathos, and logos, and you go through all the different kind of pieces. But when the argument all of a sudden goes from logical to emotional, where now all of a sudden people are making ad hominem attacks and they're attacking you as the individual, not necessarily the quality or of your character or the information which you're presenting, you've pretty much won that. And we see that all too often, especially on the internet, when you start providing people information or this. Like you remember that dude, the toes forward thing with the squatting.
The sprinting. I mean, that turned in great content for us, so I'm not mad at it.
Well, no, it was great content. But like as we just kept hammering that dude with just like factual information and providing more and more information, the guy just eventually imploded because he was building his whole position on a house of cards.
Mm-hmm. And then blocked.
And then he blocked us, which is the ultimate like child fucking movement. And it's pretty hard.
You just get people to keep exhibiting more of those logical fallacies, right? You brought up the term critical thinking and asked the question, is that a big problem? I don't think that we're teaching it enough today either. Because if you think to how you went to school, I mean, regardless of the rhetoric major at Berkeley, we're taught what to think, not how to think.
Yeah.
Right? Even in PT school, I actively joke that I'm trying to unlearn everything I was taught there.
Well, but it's easier to just download information and to get a bunch of like factory, so the way our education system was designed was to create factory workers.
Right.
Just like, hey, can you come in, can you sit in a line? Can you learn this information? Can we plug you in like a cog? And what I think is lost, and I didn't understand this until I went to college, because high school is not necessarily like that. Critical thinking is what you need to learn in education. Can you analyze both sides of this thing? Can you understand where this is coming from? Can I put a logical argument together to disprove and prove, and then think critically and remove emotion from it? The problem is that social media and everything around us today is so emotionally charged, that nobody is willing to have rational conversations.
So how do we start to work past that, right? How do we take all these emotional individuals and allow them to...
They need more exercise, dude.
They need more reps, right?
I think they need more exercise. I think people need to get the fuck out, turn off the thing, and get out there and get more exercise, and like actually go out and talk to their neighbors. Walk over and talk to your neighbor, and like, I mean, if you turn on the news, you would think that we're, at each other's throats. Like Texas just passed a constitutional carry. And Harry Heppenstall sends me something, and Harry's in the UK, it makes it look like, in the UK, the way they were making it look, it's like that Texas is the Wild West and we're a bunch of, just giving everybody guns and like, but there's like 20 other states in this country that are constitutional
Including
carry.
Arizona.
Yeah, constitutional carry. You don't need a permit, and they have open carry here in Texas. Like it's really weird. I mean, because I've had a concealed weapons permit for years. It's like nothing's going to necessarily change. They're just changing the law on the books, but that perception is this idea that like, don't go to Texas. They all have guns. Well, Texans already all have guns, so it's not that big a deal. But just that perception and the way that people are being spun and not using critical thinking. And, and then I provided to Harry and he's like, oh, well, I'm like, yeah, but in the UK, like the way they're going to make it look is like Texas is this Wild West state. Like you watch Young Guns, that's or Tombstone, that's what it's going to look like in Austin.
Right. It's just all the conditioning, what they're brought up to think, right, about a certain topic. It's you brought up the physicality of just getting out there and exercising. I think that's great from a distraction standpoint. It gets you, not even distraction, but it takes you away from that potentially volatile situation that you're being fed all this information that you're going to react to. But I also think that we need more mental reps in as well. Like you have to train this critical thinking skill. It's like any other muscle in your body. And so I think a really good practice that I like to do on a monthly basis is take stuff that I think I know to be truthful and try and dismember it. Like, how can I prove myself wrong? Mm-hmm. And then that gives you the mental reps, the skills to learn how to dismantle your own arguments. Because if you can't critically think for yourself, the inner critic, I don't think that you can critically think with others, so in a team environment, or to be able to have a logical, rational conversation with somebody else.
Well, you have to have the education too, the information. Like if you're gonna, like whether we're gonna argue the fine points of human movement or this and all these other pieces, you have to understand like the basic framework from which it comes from. And I think all too often, and I've seen this all too often with like whether it be regenerative farming, strength conditioning, performance. I mean, all this other stuff is that there's a lot of things that feel right that aren't right. And people really cling to that feeling of like, well, or this worked for me, or this kind of this personal deal. But, we were talking off the podcast about research. And I always like the one Charles Palkman put out, which is if you're waiting on the research to prove it, you can be 10 years behind the curve. So I think that as a critical thinker and as a forward thinker, you have to be able to make bets. You have to be able to, have an idea. You have to go out and test it, prove it, and whatever. And if you're just waiting for the research to support it, you're going to be so far behind the curve that you're never even going to get started.
Yeah. I think it's a beautiful summation of where we're at with things right now.
Yeah. So more exercise, get out, meet your neighbors, stop getting all your information from social media. And at the end of the day, critical thinking is I think what people need to start focusing on and not being swayed by emotion. The present climate feels so volatile and so emotional. I think back on like the videos of people just screaming at the top of their lungs and crying when Trump was brought in, and like just these visceral responses, and being like, it's only 4 years, or people upset about Biden. I'm like, well, he's only going to be there for another 30 days once they declare him, go in and give him some mental fitness testing and figure out that guy's.
I don't know who's testing him and fudging.
No, like this is a problem, man. Like, and I said it on a podcast. Like this is elderly abuse. Like, it's legitimately elderly abuse to like put him in a situation which is very unbecoming. Like the guy was our vice president, and he was a sharp tack and like a lawmaker and a person of respect. And to see him in this situation, like long pauses in this, and the guy's getting lost, and you can see like that kind of like reptilian, almost like a look in his eye, where he kind of comes out and he can't focus his eyes. Like I'm looking at this and I'm like, this is awful. Like we're putting this man who obviously doesn't have the mental fitness. And I don't give a shit who you voted for or what side you sit, Democrat, Republican. I don't give a shit. But like as I'm seeing this, I'm like this is elderly abuse that they're putting this man in this situation. Like it's fucking it's stealing dignity, and it's undignifying. Like when he fell up those stairs, he kept falling. He couldn't even walk up the stairs. And I'm like, this is how you want to be remembered? Like to me, it's I mean, the leader of the free world. You want to talk about it, but at the end of the day, man, like you have to have a high amount of mental fitness to be able to do this. And he's had a interesting turn, whether it be Alzheimer's or some form of dementia or something that's happening neurological. And when I look, I feel really just embarrassed and really sad for that dude that he, and the people that are pushing him and propping him up and getting him out there and doing all this are really to blame for it. I mean, somebody needs to be like, hey, this isn't dignifying. And if it was my grandfather or if it was, my dad or somebody, I would be like, this is a problem. Like, I don't want him to be remembered like this. And this is some form of elderly abuse.
Yeah, but how do you start to question those people behind him pulling the strings, right?
They don't give a shit.
No, that's the problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, their vested interest is pushing their own agenda.
Right.
And, not necessarily like the dignity of an individual. I mean, even at the end of Ronald Reagan's time, like he had like something going on, whether it was a stroke, but of course there was no social media. So, you would see him get up and he would deliver, but you can see the difference in Reagan, like early on when he was on Johnny Carson and when like the presentations and whatever, and you can see what happened at the end of his presidency, where I think that they were just trying to just get him to the end. And like the speeches and all that. And like, but unfortunately you had to turn on the TV and like the newspapers weren't going to necessarily report on it. And so, Nancy Reagan, who was his wife, was real instrumental to the point where, the conspiracy theories might jump on this one, but that she was making all the decisions and signing his name on a bunch of stuff. So if you want to check that one, Tex.
Fact checker, Tex.
So that's an interesting piece, but like there was a deal where they were trying to protect his legacy and they were trying to like protect what he had done and, had handlers around him to kind of push this whole deal through. I mean, but this deal with Biden, because we are in such a situation where the media is so forefront with social media and this, and like every little bit is, it's not like, and it's instantly shared. I mean, there's cameras everywhere and reporters and this, and you see it and you're like, this is a real problem. And I'm not saying it like, as a, anything political. I'm just saying it as a human and as a person who, I watched my dad, cancer take him, and I watched that, break down, and I watched that whole thing, and I see this, and I'm like, man, this is a dude who's doesn't have his mental fitness and his mental faculties and is not operating at 100%, and they're just propping him up because this is the guy that they need to go out and push their agenda, and it's fucking awful.
Yeah, everything's magnified, and you could like feel the pain, right? You can feel what he's going through.
Well,
right? Whether or not you agree with him or not.
Well, he's sitting up there giving talks, and all of a sudden, like the guy will have like, and it's pretty. They call them senior moments, right? Like, this is something like I remember my mom joking around. She's like, "Oh, your grandfather had a senior moment," which is like all of a sudden they would just kind of forget or get forgetful, or just like train of thought would stop, and all of a sudden he's like mid train of thought, and he'll put his hand up, and you've heard it, and you're like, dude, this is a legitimate senior moment. Like he is, like something is going on, and like it's pretty interesting within like the face and the eyes, and you can see it, and you're like, how come somebody's not saying anything about this? How come somebody's not, being like, hey, like this isn't fair to this individual to put him in this situation. Like think about the pressure and the stress and dealing with these situations and reporters and analyzing it. Everything that you are doing is in a microcosm of analyzing, and the microscope and everything that you've done, every signature is, questions. And there's people that's all they do is check that information and push. You would have to be like the mental fatigue.
Yeah, we saw the accelerated aging of
Obama.
W and Obama.
Mm-hmm.
The only person that actually looked like he got younger was Trump. I think Trump was
it's a party for him.
No, I really think Trump was such an interesting narcissist who survives off of like just controversy,
It's
power.
like a fictional bad guy that feeds off the energy.
Like the negative energy and the turmoil and the battle and the strife. Like that dude probably just like popped out of bed every day and was like, who am I going to fight today? And like that was, I think, what got, because he's not a drinker, right?
That's right.
And he crushes fucking
Diet Cokes.
Diet Cokes and Kentucky Fried Chicken. So he's not a drinker. Like Obama was a drinker. He would brew beer, and he liked to have a few drinks. And
W was he quit the sauce before his presidency.
Obama was a big smoker too. Yeah, so Obama W dipped like
I don't know if he still dipped, and then it was
when I met him, when he came and met us on the campaign trail, he had the biggest dip in I've ever seen.
And I know he was
to the point where he was like when he was like this, like when they did the pictures, he was like trying to roll it in.
Got the draw.
Oh yeah,
I do appreciate. I'm a fan.
And
he was committed to physical exercise and weight training.
Yeah, so Obama was super fit. Played basketball, and to me, was very presidential in all of his speaking, and like whenever he got up there, like you got up and that dude was switched on. Like you saw him. Like one of my favorite moments was when the USA basketball was playing, and like LeBron and those guys were killing it, and Obama's sitting courtside, with his wife, and like he's up there cheering, and just like the dude's, like it was a cool moment. And I think, at least for me personally, what I want to see in a president or as a leader is I want to see somebody who's not only fit, but I want to see somebody that's sharp as a tack, and somebody who's out there putting confidence in the people in an unconfident time. And to see a world leader stand up there and have senior moments and get forgetful and then dribble on. I mean, I look at it and I'm like, man, I feel really awful for this dude, and I feel awful that this is how he'll be remembered, and this is his legacy, and more importantly, that they pushed him into this, because I don't believe that if he was firing on 100%, he would even be in this situation. I mean, it's like just wind him up, put him out there, make him look like a fool, and that's hard to watch for me.
Is that a product of the environment?
I think it's the powers that be, and whether it be big tech. I mean, think about this, right? Think about the power of big tech and the money, and Twitter, Facebook, and all the social media and everything basically betting on that individual to be that world leader. I mean, think about the amount of backing he had. Like, I think I saw the statistic that Mark Zuckerberg's nonprofits that he was investing in to guarantee, fair elections. He invested something like $51 million just in Georgia alone, which isn't necessarily a very big swing state, and just $51 million is what they had in just Georgia alone. So I mean, they were putting it in the billions of dollars that he privately funded into these different things. So I mean, there's a ton of money and a ton of influence behind that individual. And the hardest part is just looking at him and being like, man, I feel really embarrassed, and I feel really sad that he's in this situation. I mean, because nobody wants to look like an aging, forgetful old man. Like that's, there's a reason that old actresses don't go out and walk the red carpet, because they're afraid that people are going to remember them as they are today, not as they were. And I think like that idea of like legacy and all that is so important. And when I see that with Biden, man, I feel like I was watching some of the clips from the summit and this, and it's just like, dude, this isn't good. So it's a sad deal. So
asked and answered.
Yeah,
definitely.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Power Athlete Radio. I'm John Wellborn. I'm joined by Tex and Dr. Matt Zanis. And till we meet again. Bye.
Bye.
I'm a loaded freight train and I'm right on track.